And I think that that's the best way to describe numbness, is like this tingly white noise of just like, it sort of disrupts all senses. And so it's just sort of like this, like, it's sort of like this blockage, like a cloudy sort of tingly just feeling that starts to kind of take over. And so it makes it harder to think. It makes it harder to act, to do anything.
Welcome to another episode of What It's Like to Be You. I'm Josh Levine, your host. Today, I am sitting with my very good friend, Jamie Eichar. Jamie and I met in my very first Enneagram class over 8 years ago. And Jamie's a person that I find really inspiring from an inner work point of view. Jamie, we've gone through a lot of classes together, including a 2-year program in which Jamie really pushed through his 9 passion of sloth and committed in a huge way to his inner work. And we talk a little bit about that in this episode, what that was like for him. Jamie also, having really spent a lot of time with his own inner process, has really great language for what it's like for him when he numbs out, what his experience of anger is, what it's like for him to be in... Actually, let me frame it this way. Jamie has thought a lot about conversational dynamics as a 9, what it's like for him to show up with such a comforting, welcoming, receptive presence, and how people often find that they can just pour themselves out in his presence, but also the experience of him getting steamrolled by other people, not wanting to interrupt them. A lot of really good stuff here, and Jamie has, as I said, great language for it. Not just that, but also the process that he's gone through to start working on this stuff, what it's like for him to start expressing his anger or to confront people about conversational dynamics that aren't working for him, including some of his friendships. So really, really good stuff here from an inner work point of view for Type 9s. I think this is a really great, user-friendly introductory conversation to the Type 9 structure. Jamie's niceness is just incredibly clear, and he's such a sweet and lovely and gentle person. And the way that he characterizes his struggle with 9 sloth and numbing out, and the way that he has worked with himself, in my view, all the above, the whole package is really beautiful and inspiring to me. So I'm really excited for you to meet and learn from my friend, Jamie. One final piece of this to add is that Jamie's full typing is self-pressed social 9 with a 1 wing 963 trifix. So without further ado, here is Jamie. Welcome everyone to another interview. This is my friend Jamie Eichar, who I met in my very first Enneagram class in Grafton, Illinois, close to St. Louis, almost over actually 7 years ago now. And Jamie is a Type 9 and also a new father as of a few months ago, and a very beautiful what's the word for this? Cinematographer, film guy, photographer.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, filmmaker.
Yeah, filmmaker.
Video guy.
Yeah, video guy. And I'm really, really excited to talk to you about what it's like to be you, and in particular, what it's like to be a 9. Cool. So I'd like to start with just, how are you feeling right now?
Yes, feeling more calm, because we had a little offline chat where I got out my nerves, but slightly nervous at the same time. And interested to hear what we're going to get into, what we're going to talk about.
Cool.
Yeah.
So my favorite question to ask up front is just, I would love for you to take me on the journey of your Enneagram origin story.
Yeah. Man. Okay. So one of the things that will be hard for me is to expound and talk a long time about myself, because I don't like talking about myself. And the Enneagram origin story could be a long story or a short story.
Okay.
But so because of the person that we both took our course from, Sandy Wilder, Lauren, my wife, was good friends with him, and we at one point were having dinner with them, and they brought up the Enneagram, brought out the big wisdom of the Enneagram book, um, and kind of mentioned like we might be this type or this type, and just sort of piqued our interest a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And this was probably 3 or 4 years into our marriage, um, and now we're 7 years into our marriage. So 4 years ago now, um, and we just started diving into it and like looking into our types. What took the quiz, um, and when I discovered I was a 9, it was like the biggest. It was like someone was reading a chapter of who I was, and I've never been able to explain to people kind of like my sense of being in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Very much felt like I didn't fit within society
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways. Um, but the Enneagram 9 chapter was like a blanket. It was like, oh, this is me. I was able to explain to Lauren, like, this is who I am. This is what it feels like to be me.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of explained actually a lot of like a lot of confrontations that we had been having in our marriage, and a lot of just sort of like aspects of why I was the way I was, why I was maybe zoned out during certain times, why I was maybe not as present as I wanted to be in life in general. So it was very revealing. And then because of that, we had so many conversations. We started getting interested in classes. So we took the class with you,
Mm-hmm.
and then did the 2-year program, which dove into the Enneagram types, and um, from there kind of became, I guess, Enneagram amateurs, and use it in our day to day language. And um, now I feel like it's led me to a path of sort of like enough self awareness to where I feel like I can use it as a tool in my day to day life, and feel like I'm actually uh, yeah, utilizing it in a good way. And I feel like I've advanced to some degree in my life with that knowledge, and been able to, I guess I would say, challenge myself to become a little bit more self-aware and more present as a result of knowing the Enneagram.
Yeah. Beautiful. So when you read the chapter, I loved your phrase that it felt like a blanket,
Yeah, yeah.
which is
Yeah.
a very nice sort of comforting
Yeah,
way to
yeah, it's true.
experience it. Yeah. And it's funny because not a lot of types experience reading their type like a comfort, you know.
Yeah.
Like for example, as a 3, when I read the chapter on type 3, I was horrified. um,
Yeah,
because it revealed these really it revealed a lot of things that I didn't have yet accepted into my self-image. But
right.
for you, it sounded like there was a softness and a comfort to it.
Yeah, yeah, I think that partially maybe because I'm already a self-deprecating person, the things that were negative about a 9, I tended to already be um, not aware of, but it didn't surprise me. It wasn't like, it just surprised me that someone put such specific language to it
Yeah.
that I felt seen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was a shock to me. And that was just like maybe why it was such a blanket, was it was just like, wow, somebody knows me. So, like somebody literally wrote a chapter about me, and
Yeah.
often feel so forgotten or left behind,
Mm,
that the fact that there was like a chapter of a book that was so specific to me just felt so comforting,
right.
um, and really like made me feel like I did have a place in the world. So I think that that's why it was comforting. Also, I'm a self-pres 9, so
Mm-hmm.
self-preservation, just like I think anything that can bring comfort to me is a big thing that I tend to point out in my life, and that was one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, just because you brought it up now, I was going to ask you about this later, but can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about? Are you willing to go into what is this feeling that you're bringing up that you feel left behind? or forgotten?
Yeah, yeah. Um, so one of my modes of being, especially in like new social environments, is to um, I tend to kind of like be more fearful. I kind of don't want to ruffle feathers. I don't want to be the center of attention, especially not right away.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so oftentimes I'll be quiet, sort of as like a mode of being. Like I'll just like sort of shut down and fade into the background. But at a certain point, I want to be noticed. It's like there's a desire there to be actually like seen and cared about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that's innate in humans in general, but if you're afraid to stand out, you're not going to get noticed, and tend to the sort of the message that you're nobody special tends to get reinforced, because if you're not willing to put yourself out there a little bit, then oftentimes you do fade in the background, and the social people will kind of all notice each other, and uh, it's easy to sort of just fade into the background. And I think that when you've had that message reinforced over and over and over, even if you're not fading into the background, you start to assume you are, and you
Mm-hmm.
start to kind of have this self-fulfilling prophecy of like, oh, nobody's noticing me, or this person hasn't asked me a question this whole time I've been here. It's kind of a recurring theme if we like go out with friends. It's like, oh yeah, I ask a lot of questions, but people don't ask me a lot of questions. Why is
Mm-hmm.
that? And so like, yeah, I don't, I still, there's like times where I'm like baffled by why I don't get asked questions. Is it like that I'm not good at talking? Is it that people are just more interested in talking about themselves, or what is it? And it like, just even now, it feels odd to be talking this much. Like, this is way more talking than I typically do on an average day.
Yeah.
This is a lot of talking. It probably
Yeah.
feels very short for a lot of people, but feels like a lot for me.
Well, let's see. There's so many ways to go with this.
Yeah, yeah.
I just want to reassure you. First of all, it's really lovely to hear you speak, and
Thanks.
and how interesting for you to be on the receiving end of an interview,
Yeah,
having just
yeah,
brought that topic up.
yeah,
Yeah. So right this moment, actually, you're having an experience of, in a sense, the reverse of that pattern,
for
um,
sure. And
which
it feels
is,
good. It's like kind of fun. It's like nice to be there's some sense of like somebody cared enough to like think to ask me to be asked questions. Like that's cool.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's also nerve-wracking and like not normal.
Right. So there's both, right? It's
Yeah,
there's the glow of being attended to, but
yeah,
there's also
yeah.
the sort of discomfort of is terror too strong a word, of being in the spotlight?
Yeah, no, it's not. There are times where it is absolutely terrifying, and times where it's manageable.
Right, right.
And I think this is definitely more manageable. And I'm not sure that that's true for every nine. It's definitely my unique flavor of.
Hmm.
I think there's for me in general, being the center of attention, especially in terms of speaking, has been a point of um, fear and pretty hard for me throughout my
Hmm.
life. So
Right.
um, that's definitely my unique flavor of fear that comes up. Um,
Okay. Yeah, I
yeah,
do think that's an important point to reinforce too, because I know a lot of nines that are actually very, they're public speakers and stuff like
right,
that. So it's not
right,
we're not talking about a universal fear of spotlightness with the nine, but there is a sense of,
right.
with the nine, this um, almost willingness to fade into the background,
Hmm.
that then ultimately creates a self-fulfilling prophecy that then gives rise to these questions that you brought up, like, why isn't anybody paying attention to me? Why is nobody asking me questions?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Be
But
nice if people did.
yeah, yeah. And then that, even that phrase that it'd be nice if people did, if you followed that all the way down. So one thing we talk about nines, and I'm being a little pedagogical in this moment, but one thing we talk about with nines is their relationship with anger,
Mm-hmm.
and how with nines, typically there's a suppression of anger or a discomfort
Yeah.
with anger.
Yeah.
Is there, do you experience anger behind that statement? It'd be nice if people,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. In the past, I probably wouldn't have admitted that or wanted
Hmm.
to acknowledge that, but I think that I've started to develop a little bit of a better relationship with anger.
Yeah.
Um, and in some ways, it's been nice to acknowledge that, because then I realize it is a frustration of mine. So what can I do about it? And then I actually start trying to speak up more, or trying to, if it's a person that I'm close enough with, let them know what the dynamic is, what it looks like, and say, hey, like, I've asked you tons of questions, but our dynamic isn't really a back and forth. Can you ask me questions sometimes? Not maybe so
Yeah.
plainly and direct like that, but definitely there's anger there, and um, anger in general has been a thing where it, I've acknowledging that I am like have anger and have been um, I don't know how to like phrase this or put this, but like I've been very angry at times in my life,
Mhm.
and it's rare for people to see that unless you're very close to me.
Right.
Um, yeah, I don't know where to go with that, but that's been, yeah, been true for me for
Can you
sure.
talk a little bit about what that journey's been like for you to express anger, or even to bring yourself to a conversation where you say, hey, this dynamic is not reciprocal?
Yeah. Um,
Like, what
I
makes it
guess.
hard, maybe, is the question.
Well, what's interesting now is like knowing that that's a part of me. It's less hard to acknowledge that that's true, and I think that it's been healthy because then I have less outbursts of anger.
Hmm.
There's less like buildup. And I think this is a thing for a nine where you hold back your anger, you assume that you don't have it, that you're just like this like beacon of peace, and you're just gonna like kind of suppress it, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden you get to this boiling point where things are just like, you can't sort of sustain that level of like suppression anymore, and then it
Hmm.
just like explodes. And that was my experience, I think. And it still happens from time to time, but it was happening a lot more regularly probably 3 years ago ish.
Hmm.
um, and then I think there was a certain point where I just acknowledged that that type of anger isn't healthy. I mean, it got to the point where I had an outburst where I punched a wall. I punched a hole in a wall, and I was
Uh-huh.
just like super angry.
Yeah.
And something got me to that point, and it was just like, okay, this isn't healthy. Um, and so I started bringing it up more in therapy, started talking about it more, started acknowledging it more. And so now it's easier in little moments to be like, oh, I feel that sense of anger. I feel that sense of frustration.
Hmm.
Let me talk about it with Lauren. Let me talk about it with my friend, because that's going to be so much more tenable than that outburst where I punched a wall.
I
And so
see.
I might as well deal with it in that little moment, because I don't want to experience that big moment again.
Hmm. And then when you
um,
when you bring yourself to that little moment, is there, that seems like it sounds small, but actually is a sense of radical
yeah,
shift. Right.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it's practice. Like it's a practice behavior, and the more
Yeah.
I've practiced it, the more I've realized that people appreciate it. um,
Okay.
it was very scary at first, I think, to bring these things up,
Yeah.
but I think that because I'm so tactful in the way that, because I'm so afraid of like hurting someone's feelings, or like
Uh-huh.
uh, coming across as like an angry person, I think I'm very tactful in how I bring something up. And in
Right.
fact, like I think I'm actually pretty um, gentle with how I approach my anger if
Yeah.
I'm bringing it up in a more specific instance. And so um, it actually comes out, and people appreciate what I've said. And
Hmm.
um, So yeah, it's kind of become somewhat of a strength, which I like.
Yeah. And this is getting to one of the things that we talk about in the high side of 9 is this ability to the willingness to go against the grain or to ruffle some feathers or to introduce conflicts in the
Yeah.
service of a greater harmony.
Yep.
So, the awake 9 realizes that conflict is subsumed within it, is not opposed to harmony. Harmony is
Right.
inclusive of
Right.
these kinds of, and conflict maybe is even too strong of a word for what you're bringing up, but there's a way
Yeah.
that, you know,
Yeah.
um, yeah, but
Discomfort.
yeah,
Discomfort is a big word for me in that regard. It's like it's okay to have these moments of discomfort because ultimately it's going to lead to a greater sense of uh, cohesion or togetherness once you actually understand where you're at, and that person can hear you and you can hear them, and that's a better place to be at rather than the like, oh, like it's no big deal, and then there's like tension, this underlying
yeah,
tension,
right. Yes, the no big deal thing. That's like
Yeah.
sort of a classic 9 phrase, like it's no big deal.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, okay, I want to maybe come back to that in a little bit, but I want to bring up something that we talked about right before we started recording here.
Yeah.
I asked you how you wanted to be introduced.
Yeah.
And I just realized that I didn't do it actually the way that you asked. So the way that you
That's
had
great.
asked me to introduce you was um Jamie is a nice guy. Uh Jamie is someone who wants to be a person that people can talk to, a comforting
Yeah.
presence. And and something else you said that was so beautiful to me was um you said I would want for my legacy to be um someone that you can trust.
Yeah.
Someone you trusted.
Yeah.
Can you
For sure.
can you say why that was important to you? What's essential about that?
um well, I think it's the reason that I'm now pursuing getting a degree to become a licensed therapist.
Hmm.
And I think that there's this like, I don't know, I guess it feels like I'm making some sort of impact with my power as a 9
Hmm.
when people feel like they can talk to me. Like it feels like um, I have, I know that people have told me enough, and I feel this innately that I am somewhat of a comforting presence. Like I'm a relaxing person, and I feel like the more that I am able to provide a space where people feel like they can reveal aspects of themselves, then it feels like I'm doing something impactful. And there aren't a lot of areas in life where I feel like I can actually make an impact, but I know that that's sort of like very direct and something that um, feels like a strength or a superpower as a 9 or as myself, you know.
Yeah. And this is a bit of a leading question too, but I love your phrase, your power is a 9.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because power is a word that we typically in the Enneagram world associate with 8s, but I think that it's rightly
Hmm.
associated here with 9s too. There is a power to this quality of um in classic Enneagram language, helping people land,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then emanating this very comforting, inclusive
Yeah.
presence that allows people to just feel comfortable. They can just be themselves around you. There's like almost a magic to it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's like a natural ability there, and I think I'm realizing more and more that like I may be an easy spot to land. Like it's easy to kind of come to me about something, but now I'm
Hmm.
appreciating that there are tools now, like as like learning to be a therapist or learning some theory around therapy, for example. It's like, oh, now I can actually have tools to help people go deeper than just like that initial contact. It's like, oh, I'm a safe place, and now I can actually like take it further and make it a mastery rather than like I'm just a nice person to talk to.
Oh, that is really cool. That's very, very cool. Oh man,
Yeah.
there's a lot there. So one thing I'm pulling out of that is that this capacity to make other people feel comfortable for you has been a natural. It's like it's almost a passive gift.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's it's a thing that you haven't really given, or maybe until the Enneagram or therapy school, like a lot of
Right.
very conscious thought to. It's not a skill
Yeah.
necessarily, right? For you, it's
Right.
like this is just your way of being.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
then therapy school is helping you. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, yeah, I've had like, I think this has been a common experience I've heard from other nines too, where it's like you have sometimes you just like meet a person and they like I went and bought a roof rack from a guy at like off Craigslist, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and he started like opening up to me about his divorce, like in the like first like 2 minutes of like handing me the roof rack, and we just sort of like had this
Wow.
like
Okay.
conversation, and like
Mm-hmm.
I probably said maybe like two things in that conversation, and like
Mm-hmm.
you know he sort of just like open, and I feel like that happens over and over, sort of in certain circumstances of just
Mm-hmm.
like there must be a thing about me where people feel like they can just open up, you know?
Yeah. But on the flip side, like sometimes the challenge of being a nine is being
Yeah.
steamrolled by people who overshare and don't
Yes.
know and can't sense that you don't want to talk.
Yes.
Can you
Yeah.
talk a little more about that?
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's something that I've started to stand up against.
Nice.
Uh, but I still struggle with it. It's like it's probably one of my main areas of like of frustration with um, humans is just like being steamrolled, and so I think that because that provides some sense of anger, I'm starting to maybe do something about it. But I guess an example I could give is I have a friend who's an eight,
Mm-hmm.
who is just one of the funniest, most charismatic, um, confident uh, people I know, and I love listening to this person, and just I feel like it's almost as if our relationship dynamic has been I'm watching a TV show um, of this friend of mine,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so enjoyable that for a long time I just let it that dynamic persist, and there were times where it was just like this is hilarious. I love this guy. Like he's so funny. He's talking and like this is great. And then it gets to a point where it's like, oh wait, I've forgotten like that. I don't. It doesn't seem like I exist in this relationship.
Right.
And and it would get to points where like it felt like he was just talking at me, and we started to get into more like political conversations and more um, serious topics.
Uh-huh.
And then those topics started becoming, rather than just like having this like funny fun friendship where I was like sitting in the background watching this person,
Mm-hmm.
it started becoming that person giving me lots of advice, giving me lots of like it sort of just felt like this steamroll of like everything that I need to be doing, everything that I need to be thinking is what this person is thinking. And we'd have conversations where I think the split would probably be like, if it were an hour of time, it'd be 55-5. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, yeah, 55 minutes of somebody talking at you is just like not fun, and it started to become a bear, and I think that's when I started to hit my breaking point with this person, and it was a way to sort of practice these conversations of like, hey, just so you know, this is what the dynamic looks like, and this is
Right.
hard for me. Um, and then yeah, I think because that person appreciates directness, I started to realize that was actually something I should have done a long time ago.
Yeah. So take that's a really good example to dig into for a second, the 55
Yeah.
5. So one thing that I understand about nines that I hear from some nines is that it's not just that it's difficult to sort of interrupt the flow of someone else's speech.
Yeah.
It's also that if I were to do that, I wouldn't even know what I would say.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Wow. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
almost like looking inside, and then the content of my personhood and my opinions, my preferences, what I might share is just there's a blankness. Is that something you relate to?
Yes, and especially so when you have to interrupt someone.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
because the act of interrupting someone is uncomfortable in and of itself. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like for me, when I'm uncomfortable, I start to shut down.
Mm-hmm.
So if this person is talking for, on a 10-minute thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a thought within that, and they're speaking very quickly, that thought comes up and I have this anxiety about it. I'm like, oh, I want to share something.
Mm-hmm.
So then I have the anxiety and I want to interrupt, but then it's like, no, the act of interrupting would then cause me some internal conflict. And by that point, whatever I need to share won't come out eloquently because I'll be all frazzled by the act of interrupting somebody. So that's
Okay.
just like, so yeah, overwhelming.
Uh,
And so then you just let it pass.
and that
There's,
whole dynamic happens silently internal.
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. At least for me, yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me, and it also, well, maybe the question is, what helps you feel comfortable?
That's a good question. I don't know that there's something that somebody has done that's uniquely made me comfortable aside from when I notice that somebody is also is okay with maybe a little bit of a slower pace.
Mm-hmm.
That's something actually I appreciate about you, Josh, is I think that you even at the beginning of this, like you sat there and thought about something for maybe 30 seconds of silence and just like was like, oh, like somebody who actually like works at my pace. That's nice.
Uh-huh.
um, and so that is nice because then if I have a moment of like silence or thinking, I know that that person is also used to that experience, and that's really nice. But that's really hard to come by. Really, really unique. So
Yeah,
um,
and yeah, go ahead.
no, that's it. That's it.
Yeah, I'll just put an exclamation point by that, because generally speaking, the pace of conversation is set by the faster person.
Yep.
And what a lot of nines experience is there are some, maybe faster nines, quote unquote, but there's a delay in response. It's like the nine first has to sense. This is also, remember, nines are a body type.
Yep.
Um, so it's like, and being out of touch with the body. It's like, this is so fascinating to me. How do you know what you think? How do you know what you're like? If someone asks you, what do you want for dinner? How do you know what your preference is? It comes from
Mm-hmm.
the body. And for
Mm-hmm.
nines in the average state, being sort of diffused in the body, it's like it takes a minute after I ask you for your preferences to sort of recollect themselves, or to um, constellate themselves out of the diffusion, and then to
Yeah.
present themselves as a real preference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
So it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting because there's this dilemma that comes up when relationship with nine is, on the one, it's like it becomes, on the one hand, or maybe the question, it's like what I'm exploring is, whose responsibility is it? So there's the
Right.
person who's speaking with you, who can create the conditions conversationally in which you feel comfortable, by
Right.
slowing down, by creating space. And there's also, from your perspective, the ability to interrupt and ask for more silence or what you need.
Yeah.
Um, so how do you think
Yeah.
about that dynamic?
Um,
And I know I
I
just said
think
a lot, so anything.
no, no, no. I think that that's like something I've thought about actually quite a bit.
Mhm.
I think that society as a whole tends to um, like it just feels like there's no stopping this sort of like uh, train, I guess, of like societal self-importance, and I think that that comes with like talking about yourself and talking quickly just seems to be a part of that. And so I feel like there's just I've it almost feels impossible to meet a person and have them say, take the responsibility on themselves and say, you know what, I notice you're not getting a lot of talk time, so let me pause for a minute and give you some, like, I don't think that I've ever experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like the responsibility is on me. Like, there's that anger about the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and it's sort of a just, I guess, the challenge of a nine in this society, or a challenge of mine in this society, to be in those environments and let people know, with my like self-awareness of like, this is my pace, or this is, you know, how I work best, and sort of set expectations or boundaries around conversations, especially if it's an environment that I'm in on a consistent basis that seems to be a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
um, and then if that, you know, if I present that information and people are aware of it, then I can, you know, have more, either more talk time, or like people are at least aware of the dynamic and can do something about it. But I feel like if they're not aware, people are just going to talk. Like, it's just sort of how our society is. And so
Mm-hmm.
um, I feel like putting that responsibility on myself, whether or not that is right, is been most successful. So
Yeah, that feels like yeah, I find myself kind of agreeing with you about it. Um,
mm,
yeah, although it also is really refreshing. Like one of the things that I think both of us so appreciated about the community that we were in with Sandy and the Educare space is that
yeah,
the way he facilitated his classes was with this, like there was so much silence in
yep,
those classes, and everybody who spoke did so volunteering themselves, but he was very trusting of the silence,
yes,
you know, that
yep,
whatever wanted to spring out of that would come. And that has a whole root in Parker Palmer's work with the Quaker
mm,
tradition. But
yeah, yeah. I
yeah, there's
forget
some.
that.
Mhm.
I forget how, um, you know, it'd be nice to. I think that I do speak slowly, in general, and like it's something that people, you know, really have to be patient with if they're actually willing to listen to me, like on a longer, in a longer conversation. And so
Mhm.
um, it's easy to forget that that silence is okay, and like it's something that is also uncomfortable. And if I were really, um, you know, having it my way in these conversations, there would be more silence, and there would be more space for that, and people would be patient enough. But the moment there is a, like, a gap and you're talking to somebody,
Mhm.
that gap will, like, somebody will swoop in and insert themselves. So it's really hard to to figure that out. But
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to switch topics.
yeah,
Um, Speaking of nines in the body center.
yeah,
So one thing I remember that was revelatory for you was getting into rock climbing.
yeah, yeah.
Can you talk
Fitness in
about,
general.
and fitness in general? Sure.
Yeah.
So can you talk about what that did for you and why that was so important and where you're at
Um,
with it now? I'd love to know.
yeah. So right now, like, for me, it's, oh, there's always been some sort of like sport. So I started out as a skateboarder. Then in high school, I was a diver, and then in college, transitioned to being a rock climber, and then sort of lost that, and then lost sort of fitness in general. Like, there was a point in my marriage where, you know, we were just like living our life. We had our business, and sort of got into some really bad shape in general,
Mhm.
and and then got back into rock climbing and got back into fitness in general. And there's, I think it's easy that you're so susceptible to numbness, or I'm so susceptible to numbness as a nine, that it's easy to almost forget about your body, to some degree,
Mhm.
which sounds a little five-ish, but it's, when I started working out and when I started climbing and focusing on it more, it was easier to feel things more. Like I don't know how to explain it, but like I'm more aware of the muscles that I that I have, and like when anger comes in or when a feeling comes in, I can feel it more in my body, if that makes any sense. Like because I'm engaging with those muscles, it's like, oh, they exist.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and so right now for me, it's surfing. Like I've kind of lost climbing, and now I'm into surfing, and that's been
Okay.
the new thing, and I freaking love it. It's
Oh,
so fun.
nice. That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah. So there's this, I love how you framed it too, this spectrum of being numb to your body and sensations all the
Hmm.
way over to being sort of vibrantly full of them, like noticing muscular movements and the way that anger takes root as a sensation in your body.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, are you able to give some words to what it's like when you're going numb?
Totally. Yeah. Um, yeah. Uh, I don't know if you've experienced like when you sleep on your hand, and like there's like,
Mhm.
you start to lose the feeling in the hand, but there's that little tingly sensation around it.
Mhm.
The tingliness, to me, I've described it, that like tingliness as white noise.
Okay.
And I think that that's the best way to describe numbness, is like this tingly white noise of just like it sort of disrupts all senses. And so it's just sort of like this, like it's sort of like this blockage, like a cloudy sort of tingly just feeling that starts to kind of take over. And so um it makes it harder to think, it makes it harder to act, to do anything. um that's more specific to like fear shutdown for me, at least.
Mhm.
There's also numbness in just sort of like uh for me, a big thing is like watching. I'm sure this is a thing for a lot of nines, is like watching or being on the internet in some capacity, like watching YouTube videos or going on Instagram and scrolling for a long time.
Mhm.
That sort of numbness almost is closer to just feeling like you don't exist, like forgetting you're there entirely.
Yeah.
And that one is like you're absorbed in whatever content you're in, and it's nice because you avoid a lot of feelings and avoid a lot of it's definitely a way to avoid hard problems in your life, is to escape into those spaces. And so that one's like, yeah, just completely sort of like gone. I become the iPad or the the TV screen or something like that,
Wow.
you know.
That's a really powerful phrase. Yeah. And can you talk, are you willing to share a little more about like what it's like when you go down a YouTube rabbit hole, or just give
Yeah,
some,
I can.
like, if I were watching you, what would I be seeing?
I haven't thought about it that way. um I think I'd be like, yeah, so YouTube rabbit hole is pretty common, especially if I'm like avoiding a work project or something like that, and
Mhm.
I'd be at my desk. Oh, and the algorithm, like, it's like designed perfectly for a nine. um, you'd see me sitting there, sort of just like sitting back watching a video,
Mhm.
um, very like focused on it, engaged in it, but like messy desk, messy sort of. It feels like that somehow like is like, I'm avoiding lots of, like, if I have a messy desk, then I'm avoiding that. If I have a messy house, I'm avoiding that. But that would be the first thing I'd go do if I were to start being productive, to start feeling productive, is start cleaning rather than doing the task that I need to do.
Okay.
um but then, yeah, like, another video pops up that's correlated, or you just go back to the YouTube home screen and they've got something that's there that's just another layer of like, oh, that's interesting to me. And I'm always telling myself this is the last video I'm going to watch.
Uh-huh.
And then I'll go back to the home screen or click through. There's like a cycle, and I'm sure this happens to a lot of people, but you have like a cycle of apps or things that you go through, and you kind of
Yeah.
reset yourself back to where you were. And you
Mm-hmm.
start the whole cycle back over, and it feels like just sort of this autopilot of like, oh, here's Instagram, here's a news site, here's
Mm-hmm.
um, whatever, and I'm back to Instagram and or back to YouTube and watching new videos and starting
Right.
the whole process over. It's very numbing, and it's one of the things that I think that is hardest for me to overcome as a nine, or hardest for me to um, stop doing. Like I just, it's so frustrating for me,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a sense of like uh I guess depression is the right word for it. Like it's depressing to see myself in that, and I think that then probably perpetuates more of it, more of that
Right.
behavior, and yeah, always always having to figure that one out. It's something I talk about in therapy for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm
um
hearing, or go ahead.
yeah, no, I want to hear what you hear.
I was hearing too, just a kind of the rhythm of it, the like the cycle of apps and stuff.
Yeah,
Which is a kind of body term. It's like getting stuck in just this,
yeah,
um, this.
feedback loop.
I don't even have the words for it, but my body is like, I get it, and I've been there also.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think maybe we've all been there. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's like a lot of nines I know, fall into that trap very easily. But I
Hmm.
feel like that is also very human now with how accessible entertainment is and
Hmm.
consumption is. It just feels like it's a problem with society in general. But
Yeah. So what's your relationship with, for lack of a better phrase, doing the task you're supposed to do?
a very negative one. That is just yeah, just the one that I have. I mean, that is what causes this like internet addiction, this like YouTube addiction or Instagram addiction, whatever it is.
Mhm.
Um, I have a history of like, and it's easy to put this on other people. Um, but I have a history of sort of rebelling against the thing that needs to be done. It almost feels like I'm like actively rebelling against what I need to do.
Yeah.
And when somebody tells me what I need to do, it becomes even more of an act of rebellion. But if
Hmm.
it's myself, it's easy to fall into this like YouTube loop. But if it's somebody telling me to do it, it's like even more so. I just want to like do the opposite. And um, if I were to go down why that is, I would assume that it's like, you know, it's an uncomfortable feeling that I am really trying to actively avoid. And there's also some sense of control around rebelling against it. I think rebelling in general has been something that has been a big part of my life, and I feel a little bit more in control when I'm rebelling for some
Hmm.
some reason.
Yeah.
But uh, yeah, once I'm able to get started on something, I can see it through. But it's the act of getting started that is the hardest. Um,
Right.
and there's a lot of overwhelm and frustration around the act of getting started on a project, and like anxiety, and it's uncomfortable, and I almost just sort of have to like shake myself to get something done, and I'll be ruminating on that to do item for sometimes days, even weeks. um, and it gives me moments of panic in my life. If there's I don't know if you've ever experienced like that person you haven't texted back or something like that, and
Uh-huh.
like, but you know you need to text them back, and then you like have this like moment of panic, like, oh, I need to text this person back, and then like that's also a trigger to like not do it because somehow like you're uncomfortable about the fact that it's been so long or something like that.
Mhm.
And I mean that's a very specific example, but that's something that comes up often if I've like avoided an uncomfortable text, or I have to like let somebody down, or explain myself in some way. I often avoid it, and then um, work tasks in general. Like there are work tasks that I hate, or um, it's been a really really big challenge because I think that work in general is something that helps me advance in life, and would I'm grateful that I have a partner who is so go getter and work focused that balances me out so much. That I've been able to, in some ways it's been hard because I've been rebelling against, my partner telling me something to do, but in other ways I think it's been really good because I see an example of somebody who's a doer and a hard worker, and I'm more inspired by that energy. And so that's been very helpful for me in that regard. And so, yeah, that's, that's work tasks in general is just not an area that I have a good relationship with yet.
Yeah, and this word rebellion is really interesting to me too, because that's another word that we
Yeah.
would typically associate with something like an 8. But
Uh-huh.
there is, with all the body types, this fundamental core need of autonomy. You know, I want to do things
Yeah.
I want to do, like, for the 8, there's a real obviousness and assertiveness about that. But for the 9, they seek autonomy by withdrawing. Or
Uh,
this is the sort of
yeah.
textbook
Yeah.
answer of it.
Yeah.
But
That
there's a
makes
way,
sense.
like, I want to do things on my own time, my own rhythm, and if you tell me what to do, there's like this exquisite sensitivity to pressure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yep.
so yeah, that was really evocative the way you shared all that. And I have a general question for you.
Yeah.
What gets you going?
Well, I mean, like I mentioned surfing earlier, and I
Right.
like felt my like excited, happy energy.
Yeah.
I really do get motivated by like problem solving. I think that's why climbing, that's why surfing, that's why uh, what's the phrase, like something like I'm good at a lot of things, but I'm the master of none. I feel like I get excited by like I I'll learn the guitar up to a certain level, and then I'll kind of stop. I'll learn surfing up to a certain level. I'll learn climbing up to a certain level, and then I'll stop. So it's like I get excited by like the idea and challenge of something, and I kind of get really like into it, like kind of hardcore, and then all of a sudden I'll hit a plateau, I guess,
Hmm.
with anything, and then won't take it further. Um, and I don't know what that's about, but that seems to be kind of a pattern in my life, and kind of the thing that I've taken the furthest in my life is photography because of
Hmm.
making it a career.
Yeah.
Um, and I do think, excuse me, I do think creativity is a part of all of that. Like I think that I get really inspired by like beautiful settings, and I think the reason video attracts me so much is like there's something about watching something that's like very peaceful and beautiful, that like when I make a wedding video, for example, I feel like I'm making a wedding video that I would connect with emotionally.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
I love that, and like I love getting to that end result and feeling like, oh, like this is like emotional, it's relaxing, it's beautiful.
Hmm.
I think the same thing with surfing. It's like relaxing. It's beautiful. It's that setting. I kind of think visually and creatively when I'm in sort of like those settings, and um, so yeah, I don't know. It feels like a little bit of a smorgasbord of like uh, what gets me going, but I think it's like creativity and then connecting like athletically to something. So something in those areas.
Yeah. And I'm also hearing your self-pres lens too a little bit. And I've seen it in
Yeah.
action actually. So first of all, I've seen what you create, and you create really beautiful stuff. It's really, really
Thank
cool
you.
what you create. Yeah. You're very, very talented at what you do.
I appreciate it.
Um
Thanks.
and one of the things that well, actually, one of the things that, because when I stayed with you guys in California,
Hmm.
one thing that thought it was fun to geek out with you about was all of your gear, and
Yeah.
how like you have your spot for everything, and how
Yeah.
much like
Yeah.
you like to research backpacks and things like that.
Yeah.
This is very self-pressy, but like there's a way it's
Yeah.
almost like it's like each lens has its own little cozy spot, you know.
Yeah. 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 That's I will admit that is probably because you were there visiting, and if you if you weren't there, things would be a lot more of a mess.
Okay.
Um but I do then get stressed out about the mess, and want things to be back in their order for sure. And it's
Mhm.
much more comforting to have everything in their place.
Right. Yeah. And also maybe we're hearing a little bit of one wing there too.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think I have a pretty strong one wing.
Cool. I'd like to end with one other exploration, and it's
Yeah.
around the word empathy gets thrown around a lot with nines. And
Mm.
I'm curious how you experience being empathic. Do you feel like an empath?
Yeah. Um, yeah. I've had a yes. I feel like an empath, very much so. And for a while, it felt out of my control to some degree. In that, like, if someone was emotional in a certain setting, especially in like our sort of the course we took,
Yeah.
if I saw somebody getting emotional, I wouldn't be able to stop the tears. It would just be like, holy crap, like I'm seeing this like powerful emotion, and I would just like feel so empathetic.
Hmm.
And um I've started to, I think probably because of like the group therapy environment, started to realize that sometimes that can um it's not necessarily always. I've started, I guess, maybe to be able to control it more to some degree, if that makes any sense.
Hmm.
In that, like, I still feel empathetic, but I'm also um, more trying to be present with the person and listen rather than get caught up in the emotion, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. I
Hmm.
feel it felt very easy to get caught up in people's emotions, and it felt good because I didn't feel emotions as much.
Hmm.
And so it felt like I was like sort of like absorbing some emotion and getting to feel things for the first time.
Hmm.
And now that I've had enough of that experience, it feels like there are still things that catch me off guard, and I do that, but it's more about like hearing a person's experience and really getting to the bottom of people's experience, in which I'm using my empathy a little bit more, to like, yeah, explore, and understand people better.
That's amazing. And one way, just I'm going to put it in my own words just so I understand it.
Yeah.
You tell me if I'm right. It's almost like when you say that your empathy was almost out of your control, it was like
Yeah.
I'm almost imagining it's like your well, we use the word merge a lot sometimes with
Yeah.
nines. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
almost like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
merge with this other person's experience.
Yep.
Like where I end and where they begin isn't really clear.
Yep.
There's a kind of there's a fluidity of boundary here, and so
Right.
their emotional experience affects me in a deep
Mm-hmm.
way. In a
Yep.
way that I can't really control because the boundary's not up. It's very porous.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so part of, we talk about with nines, the growth path for nines is, and you just said it very beautifully in your own language, is like, what is it like to shore up those boundaries and realize I'm here, they're over there,
Yes. Yeah.
right? And then being able to use empathy as a, this is too blunt a word, but as a tool, as opposed
Yeah.
to a kind of almost being taken for a ride by it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. 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 It's not very like in pursuing therapy, it wouldn't be very useful if I just got caught up in people's emotions all the
right?
time. And so it's, yeah, it's been nice to not have that be an overwhelming experience when, especially in, in circumstances where somebody's getting emotional about a very heavy topic,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to have presence and know how to handle it is nice, but it's still a challenge. And I find myself getting still caught up in it. And I think that another experience where I think nines, probably the reason nines watch a lot of content, like I was very into movies for the longest, like obsessed with watching movies for a very long time, because it was that same sort of thing where I would just get absorbed into the emotion of the film or something like that, and
Mm-hmm.
get lost in it, and that was nice.
Right. And there's a niceness. Yeah, that's the, yeah, that word nice. It's come up a lot, right,
Yeah.
in this conversation. And what's interesting to me too is it's come up a lot in the context of like these ways that you are in a sense numbing out. Well, that's probably
Hmm.
a strong word, but it's like, it's nice to get lost in a movie. It's nice to get lost in
Yeah.
someone else's experience. It's nice to be, there's a niceness even to a YouTube rabbit hole, right? There's like
Yep.
a comfort.
Yep.
It's like a blanket, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so in a sense, I want to round out this interview just by saying we've spent a lot of time, and I so appreciate your really beautiful capacity to self-reflect on this.
Sure.
I also, in a sense, find that one of the things that we didn't really foreground here is, you, for example, in our 2-year program, remember how you won? Do
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
remember that?
Yeah.
So
I
so
do.
we've talked a lot about, and I think it's very useful for people listening, the ways that you numb out, or the ways that you um, you struggle with doing what you're supposed to do, those kinds of the rebellion stuff. But there's also
Yeah.
this part of you that really is has this incredible capacity to commit to stuff. And when I mean, just for everyone listening, what I mean Juan is, we were invited in this 2-year program to take on practices for our own self-development. And there were 12 people in the program. And Jamie, you did, I mean, you took on a lot of practices and really stepped out of your comfort zone there
Hmm.
in a significant way for a long period of time,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the other thing that I think um, has been a reoccurring theme in that regard is, when I was a diver, for example, I got most improved
Mhm.
diver, and it kind of felt like that in the Enneagram course.
Okay.
Like that felt like I got the most improved award at the end of the,
Mhm.
and I feel like I hear that from my friends, like, wow, Jamie, like you've grown so much in the past few years. Like it's so cool to see.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's sort of like it's maybe, it sounds nine to me because I come in sort of like under the radar for to some degree, and like
Okay.
in the
Yeah.
background. And then the more I get comfortable in an environment, and the more that I'm able to lean into what's going on, I feel like then I'm engaged, and it's easy to see me go from whatever 0 to whatever it seemed like was the end of that course. And so that, um I don't know if that's unique to me, or if that's a nine thing, but it felt like some sort of like more like a most improved award.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Huh.
That's how I interpreted it, at least internally.
Yeah, yeah. What is it like for you to own your coolness?
Does that exist? uh,
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's scary. It's scary sometimes because I'm afraid of arrogance, and I think that that's
Uh-huh.
something that comes with a one wing of judgment, and that's a whole nother can of worms. But
Sure.
I tend to judge arrogance, and there's a fine line of like confidence and skill, and um, arrogance and coolness, and I don't want to come across arrogant, probably because I judge it, and um,
Mm.
so there's fear around it, and I'd like to, um, there have been small moments of embracing it a little bit more, and I think it comes across like maybe in some of the ways I dress, for example. It's like a shoe that might be a little flashier or something like that. Like I think
Mhm.
it's cool and I've got this certain taste, but like in the past I'd be afraid to wear that shoe, or this cool coat. I have this coat that's like it's different colors, and it's this like uh what is the material called? Corduroy. It's a corduroy jacket, and it's like got these different colors on it. And then
Uh-huh.
like in the past I would never wear it because it's too a little too like
Uh,
out there, and people
right.
would notice me.
Yeah.
But the more I develop a relationship with being okay with being cool, I guess, the more I'm like willing to wear that jacket out in public. And it's such a funny, such a funny thing to like talk about, but it's true. It's just like,
Mhm.
um, kind of baby steps into like, oh, it's okay to like be noticed a little bit.
Right.
Um, that's like a whole nother topic, but like, yeah, for a long time, I wanted to wear, and I still do wear whatever is like least noticeable, like or like what is simple and like
Mhm.
acceptable, and in high school, man, like that was like a major thing for me. It was like blend in, and
Mhm.
now it's a little bit more comfort with standing out and expressing myself, so
Cool.
yeah.
I have a sense as a my three-ishness is like wanting to cheerlead you in that. I just feel
Yeah, cool.
like yeah. Um I think maybe we'll come to a close here in a second. I'm thank you for doing this interview. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
thanks for
I
having me.
think you're welcome. I think so highly of you, and I think your presence really does have that effect on me, particularly as a three, as an assertive type, as someone who sort of has a going kind of energy. When I'm with you,
Mm,
you definitely have that nine quality of inviting me into that calming landing place. In
sweet.
fact, even on this call, I'm experiencing it. And
Amazing.
um, yeah, so I just and I love that you're going to grad school to become a therapist. I just think that's so great.
Well, it's not for sure yet. I have yet to get in. Fingers crossed that I get accepted. If I don't, then
Uh,
there are other programs, but this is the one I
okay,
want to do for.
cool.
So we'll see.
So last question is
Yeah.
what's this like for you now on the tail end of the interview, having been basically in the spotlight
Hmm.
being asked questions?
It's nice because I feel like I've been able to articulate myself in ways that I feel satisfied with,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yep.
I think that when you have the experience of going through something and you come out the other side and you constantly are sort of like analyzing, oh, should I have said this better, said this differently?
Hmm.
I feel like there's a certain point in the interview where I felt like I got into a rhythm of being able to articulate my thoughts. And so
Hmm.
that was nice to experience that and have the space. And I think you provided an environment that was safe and comfortable for me to do that. So I feel successful, and that feels really nice. So thank you for that. Thank you for for dealing with my like little anxiety attack there at the beginning of the call. uh, and just like, yeah, being so graceful with your tact and having me on.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
All right, brother. Thank you.
yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Hmm.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I feel seen, and appreciate having the nine perspective heard.
it's a really important one. It's a really important one.
Yeah,
So.
it's true.
All right.